and welcome to our Understanding Judaism class. The textbook that we're using is this book called Every Person's Guide to Judaism. It's written by Stephen J. Einstein, or Einstein, I should find out how he pronounces his name, and Lydia Kukoff, I believe that's how she pronounces her name. And it's from the 1980s, and you can tell it's old because on the back it says it's from UAHC Press, and we haven't been called the UAHC, the Reform Movement, used to be called the UAHC, which stood for the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. We haven't been called that for a long time. So I can tell it's an old book. They actually have a newer book of this, but it's much thicker. And I like this one, not just because it's skinnier and it's less intimidating for a 7-week class to look at this, but I really like the way they describe things. And it is surprisingly packed with information so that, for example, the Shabbat chapter, which is an early chapter, also has a whole discussion on Messiah that I didn't expect to see in there. So when you get to the bigger book, they separate them out in other ways, but I really like how they're describing this. There are very few overviews of Judaism books that I love. There's always something that I very much disagree with. And there are some things in this book that I disagree with, but there's very little that I very much disagree with. One of the first things that I do want to point out, though, it was the late 80s. The Reform movement was becoming sensitive to trying to refer to the genders in sensitive ways. It's not the same thing as now. You'll notice that some people have pronouns, for example, on there. Mine says she and he because he is Hebrew for she. So I mean, she and her, but we were telling jokes about pronouns last night, and this is not something to joke about. The thing that I wanted to talk about the pronouns in this is that some of the vocabulary that this book uses for words, it refers to God as he all the time. And I don't. I refer to God as, God. Usually I try not to genderize God at all because God is multifaceted. There are sometimes, and we will have a conversation about God specifically and names of God and ways of referring to God. But I want to be right off the bat because it starts, there are many things that talk about God in the first chapters. And I want to say that if I were to read this book out loud to you, I would not be saying God as he. I would never say Lord for God, partially because Lord is a word that stresses me. I was never great at history, but when I was learning about the Middle Ages and we learned about the Lord and Lady of the Manor, Renaissance times, I don't know. I never thought of them as being wonderful people, leaders that I wanted to emulate. They always were mean to their serfs, and it's not the way I think of God. So, and as most people have heard me tell the story that we had this one young man who was studying for his bar mitzvah, and he was reading a translation of his Torah portion, and it said Lord, and I said, could we tweak that? I mean, we always read through what they have to say out loud to make it easily understood when you say it. It's a different kind of understanding when you're reading something in the print than if you have to say it out loud. And so I said, can we change that translation? He said, well, but that's what it said in the book he was using. I said, yeah, but Lord can mean other things and it's uncomfortable. First of all, it's always masculine. And second of all, it doesn't mean a nice thing. For example, if I say Lord, what's the first thing you think of? And he said Vader. And so if you're going to equate God with Darth Vader, I'm not happy about that. And that's not what he was trying to say, but it is kind of the way it played out. So those are things that I would change, and we will have conversations about God and how to refer to God. I will not ever call God Lord, except one exception. I have one exception, and that is if I do a funeral or a memorial service, and we read Psalm 23, which is, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Most people find comfort from hearing those words in that way. And so I talk to the family or the mourners, and I try to figure out what will bring them comfort. And if that's what's going to bring them comfort, I will say that. But I do have some really cool, more modern translations if you ever want to hear them. But I'm not doing that today. That's the only thing that really bugged me about the beginning of the book. the first few chapters have to do with Shabbat and holidays and festivals. And in order for us to get there, we need to be able to understand something about the Jewish calendar. So I have a handout for you, which is on the page. And I will show you my page. I don't think I shared it with you yet, did I? This is the page that I have made for you. That's a kind of a hidden page right now. I'll just put it into the chat. And if I don't tell other people about this page, they're never going to know about it. I'm about to share the screen with you, and I'm going to show it to you, so you don't have to be calling it up on another device. So for this page, so far, I've kind of left the material that was on the adult education page of Understanding Judaism, but I added things to it. So the classes will include an intro about the calendar. And if you click here, you will get to this file that shows you the intro about the calendar. It's the one that I was sharing yesterday. For those of you here, I'm going to try to make this big enough so you can see it. So there are many things that we need to know about the calendar. First of all, we started in September, we started the year 5782. And so, yes, officially that is since the beginning of creation. And yes, I know that there are some things that are dated that are way before that. And I told you I wasn't good in history in school. Well, I was way worse at math. So I have no problem with the fact that I can say that things are older than 5,782 years and that the creation of the world was 5,782 years ago. But seriously, if you were to start with, and on Rosh Hashanah, we talk about that as being a day that commemorates either the creation of the world or possibly the creation of humans, which means that there were days, and we don't know how long those days were that happened before that. But either way, if you start with Ha'adam, the first human, and you start counting up how old Ha'adam was, and then the descendants and all of these things, and you keep going all through history, and you counted up all of those years, you will get to 5,782 if you were to count them. I'm not the one who's going to do that, but somebody did it, and they get to 5,782, and I'm glad that they did for us. And that's where we are right now in the calendar. On the secular calendar, we are in the year 2022. Some people like to refer to that, and this book goes into detail, and they use these words that I never expected them to use, but they'll say that we're in the year 2022 they'll call it AD, which is supposed to be AD 2022, but the words AD, the initials AD represent Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord, which means since Jesus. And for the Jewish tradition, Jesus isn't our Lord. So for us to say Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, it doesn't make any sense. So we say Common Era, because most places in the world right now, whatever their calendar is, they also have a way of reckoning that includes the commonly understood year of 2022 as being the year we're in right now. And so we call that CE as opposed to AD. And anything that came before that, instead of calling it BC, which on a secular calendar would refer to before Christ. And we don't say Christ because Christ already means Messiah also, and we do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. I think that you'll find that many Jews will say that Jesus was, some Jews don't think he ever existed. I don't think he never existed. I think he existed. I think he was a teacher. I think he was an inspirational leader. Sometimes I will tell the joke that I think he was the first Reform rabbi, which, depending on how people take it, may think that I'm denigrating Reform rabbis, and I'm obviously not. But we won't call him Jesus Christ. We'll call him Jesus. Some people won't even say that name, depending on where you are in the Jewish spectrum. Zoe, I see your hand raised. I'm unmuting you. Go.
I just had one really quick question. So the secular years, which is 2022 right now.
Yes.
Did that start at the Common Era, like starting right at the Common Era?
So that's a really good question. That's another whole story about the history of the secular calendar, because they weren't counting backwards. Like in the year 350 before Jesus, they didn't know that Jesus was coming 350 years from then. So it's only after, and it was actually the church in the first 200 years of the church that came up with these designations. I think between 200 and 400 years, the church that came up with these years and came up with what they called the before and came up with what they called the current. And that's when that happened with the secular, what I'm calling secular. And the reality is, because I said that, it's not secular at all, because it really is based on the Christian calendar. But it is the common calendar because of the influence that Christianity has on the world. But that's a very good question. There are some really good comedians that joke about that, by the way, which is why it made me laugh, is like how you knew that you were 12 years before, or 400 years before Jesus. No, it didn't start there. But the Jewish calendar did start way before Jesus did. And so we are in the year 5782. And if you see things in the Jewish calendar, if we're referring to secular years, you will see us write BCE and CE, before the Common Era and the Common Era. The biblical calendar is what defines the way of discussing time in the Torah, is how we define time still. And so I'm going to start, according to this chart, as you see on this chart, I'm going to start with a month. A month in a Jewish calendar is really awesome because it's easy to know where you are in a month just by looking up at the night sky. It's not so easy on a secular calendar to know where you are in the month, but on a Jewish calendar, you know exactly where you are in the month by looking at the night sky. The new month is a new moon. In fact, the word in English for month comes from the word moon, but in Hebrew it's a chodesh, and you say chodesh chadash, that the new month. But the new moon will be either a black sky or the very, very, very beginning of the sliver of the new moon peeping out. That's the new moon on the Jewish calendar. And so when you see a full moon, you will always be in the middle of a month on the Jewish calendar, always be in the middle of the month. So no moon in the sky or the beginning sliver of a moon, you're at the beginning of a month. And a full moon will always be the middle of the month, the 15th of the month. And you'll notice that there are a lot of holidays in the Torah that happen in the middle of the month, because it's easier to have them on days and we'll talk about a day in a second, but it's easier to have them at times when there's light at night. The moon is there. You can see that you're in the middle of the month. And so it's pretty cool to look up at the sky and always know where you are. But the fact that we're based on a lunar cycle means that our month is only about 28 to 30 days long, 28, 29, usually about 28, 29, sometimes 30 days long, in between when the new moon comes again. And if a secular year has months that are 30, 31 days long, and the Jewish calendar has months that are 28, 29 days long, you can already tell that the Jewish calendar year, 12 months at least, are going to be shorter than the 12 months on the secular year. And that is not a problem for some people who love a lunar only calendar. So for example, new moon, new months, new moon, new month. So for example, the Muslims have a lunar only calendar, and you may notice when Ramadan comes, it shifts every year to be, like 11 or 12 days earlier every single year. On the Jewish calendar, we can't let that happen. Even though the Torah defines a month and tells us when the new moon is a new month, the Torah also says, God repeats this a few times, that we have to have Passover in the first month of the year, and it has to be the month of the spring. And if we were shifting backwards a few days every year, we would not have the first month of the year being in the spring. And so somehow we have to figure out how to get the months and the years to line up. And we'll talk about that in 1 second. but I realized I probably should have mentioned what a day is. In the Torah, after the first day of creation, it ends with Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Voker, Yom Echad. There was evening and there was morning, one day. And so we know from that, and every day, at the end of every day of the first creation story, it ends with there was evening and there was morning. The second day, there was evening and a morning. The third day. So we know that according to God, what defines a day is evening and then morning. Why? So on the one hand, we can try to guess it, because we can say that first there was darkness and then there was light. So maybe it's because of a chronology of dark to light. But we also know that we have God said so. I mean, God says there was evening and morning, and that was one day. So we've got to figure this out. So our days start when the sun goes down, and it continues, the day continues until the sun goes down the next day. So for example, when the sun went down today, right now, we're already in the middle of Friday, according to the Jewish calendar, which is why Shabbat evening, Erev Shabbat, is Friday when the sun goes down, and it stays until Saturday night. So it's also, by the way, in the Zoe, I mean, not my job to teach much about the Christian calendar or the secular calendar, but it is why we have things like Christmas Eve. It was still left over from the time when the days started in the evening for their biblical calendar as well. So that's just telling you this. Now, if we're looking at our chart here, it's going to show you months, and it's going to show you which holidays fall in which month. I'm not going to focus on that yet. What I want to show you is this. This is pretty cool. I'm going to read the chart here. In the 4th century, there were two very famous rabbis, at least two famous rabbis named Hillel. Sometimes people get the two mixed up, and I don't know that that's terrible, except for timing, because this one was much more recent than the first one. But Hillel, the second Hillel, he wasn't Hillel Jr. He was just a second Hillel. The second Hillel established a fixed calendar based on mathematical and astronomical calculations. So if we knew, I mean, at some point you may have thought that it was a mystery when the moon was going to come around again, but at some point you realized that there was a way of calculating it out. The calendar that's still in use standardized the length of months and addition of months over the course of a 19-year cycle, so that the lunar realigns with the solar years. So what happens is this. You know that on our secular calendar, it takes the Earth 365 and a quarter days to go around the sun. So after 4 years, there will be this extra whole day. We'll have 1/4 of a day, and then another quarter of a day, and another quarter of another quarter of a day, so that by the end of 4 years, a whole day will have been added, and we add that to February. I'm going to give you my spiel about the secular calendar one more time, that it used to be that the beginning of the year was March, which makes sense, right? The spring makes sense, that the spring is the beginning of the year. Babies are, the baby animals are born, and the flowers start blossoming, and the whole world starts turning green and blossoming again. And so it used to be on the secular calendar, March was the very first month of the year. How do I know that's true? Watch this. Now, so the secular calendar, most of the months' names they were given those names because of various gods, depending on who was in charge at the time. So March is Mars, for example. But we have March, April, May, June, July, August, and then we have September, as in the 7th month of the year. And then we have October, as in the 8th month of the year, and November, as in the 9th month of the year, and December, as in the 10th month of the year. And then we start doing more January, as in Janus, and other god names. And so the first month used to be March, and the last month used to be February. And so when we add our extra day, we're adding it to the end of the year, which was February. And what happened with those days, by the way, so Julius Caesar decided that he wanted a month named for him, and he decided he wanted his month longer. So he was a 30-day month, and he decided July gets to be 31 days. And he took a day off of the end of the year, which was February. So February went from 30 days to 29 days. And Augustus Caesar says, I want a month named for me. And I want that name. You'd think that by now I would know who came first, Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar. I don't know, it's still. But they both decided to take a day off the end of the year. And so they both have 31 day months. And February went down to 28 days. The Jewish calendar does something similar with the fact that the first month of the year, the month that God said is the first month, the month where Passover comes, is the month of the spring. And that comes around March or April. And that's when the spring starts. And I say March or April for a good reason. There's going to be a fluctuation, but it's got to come at the same time every year, because God commanded us to have our Passover celebration in the first month of the year, the month of the spring. And what the Jewish calendar does is, in order to make sure that it stays the first month, we have leap years also, but instead of adding a day, we add a month. We add a month 7 times in a 19-year cycle. And the cycle looks like this. We're going to have an extra, and the last month of the year is called Adar. So we're going to have an Adar 1 and an Adar 2. So we're going to have an extra Adar on the 3rd, the 6th, the 8th, the 11th, the 14th, the 17th, and the 19th year of the cycle. And there's this very cool chart that shows you, if you can read pianos, then you'll see that it coincides, it's the same pattern as a piano keyboard. So after the 3rd year, you're going to add an extra month. So you've got 1, 2, 3, you've got 4, 5, 6, you got 7 and 8, and then you got 9, 10, 11, and another one, and another. So it's going to be the same exact pattern, and it's very cool, which is why I showed this to you, because I think that that's cool. So then let's go back to our chart here that shows the Jewish year and which months coincide with it. So remember that the Jewish year came first. And I hope that somebody thinks to ask, well, Rosh Hashanah doesn't come in the spring. Why do we have a new year if it's in the fall? And I say, I don't know. That always messed me up too. No, I know. Because the Torah also says that this holiday is supposed to come on the first day of the 7th month. The first day of the 7th month is supposed to be the special holy day. And it's the day that we know is supposed to coincide with the birthday of the world, or the birthday of the origin of humans. And that's the day that we celebrate when we change the calendar year, even though the first month of the year is in the spring. And so it stresses some people. Okay, so wait, good question. 12-hour evening to morning is a day? No, it's from, one day is actually from sunset to sunset. That's a day. It's not based on how many hours of daylight and darkness there are. It goes from sunset to sunset, which winds up being a 24-hour day. And actually, one of the things that I didn't talk about the other day is that knowing how many hours of daylight versus darkness there is will affect the prayer cycle in the day, will affect when you say your prayers. We're not supposed to be talking about praying. It's good. We're not supposed to be talking about, this is a good point that I didn't get to make yesterday. We're not talking about prayer necessarily yet, but some traditional Jews pray 5 times a day. Some pray 3 times a day. Some pray just twice a day, morning and evening, before, when they wake up and when they go to bed. And that's in addition to blessings. There's a tradition that you say 100 blessings every day. But when you say your prayers, there's morning prayers and there's evening prayers. When you say your prayers is dependent on when the morning and when the evening are. And so having to know how many hours in your day, look at a Jewish calendar, and just look at Jewish calendars, and they'll usually tell you when sunset is for Shabbat, for candle lighting times. If you've got a Jewish calendar app on your phone, it has these crazy times all day long that give you these like time slots of when morning prayers can be said, and when the middle day prayers can be said, and the late time days can be said. And it tells you, are you ending Shabbat when there are 3 medium-sized stars in the sky, or small stars in the sky? There's all these complicated things. We'll talk about that, but I wanted to get through this. So I'm going to say what I normally say when you wonder about why we have two New Years. We have the one that starts in the spring, we have one that starts in the fall. I'm going to tell you the truth is that on a Jewish calendar, we actually have 4 official New Years. We also have one that's for the trees, the birthday of the trees, which coincidentally is this Monday. And the name of the holiday is Tu B'Shvat, which means if you want to get really confused about names, Jewish name things. So Tu B'Shvat usually comes sometime around January or February. Shvat is the name of the month. Ba means in, and Tu means 15. It's what Tu means 15. I love that. So I can show that to you also. But it's the 15th of the month of Shvat. We celebrate the birthday for the trees. Are we surprised that we're going to have a birthday celebration for trees on the day that is the moon is the most bright? No, of course, we're not surprised about that, because it gives us an opportunity to continue to celebrate trees. Even when it's dark out, it's going to be light out. So Tu B'Shvat is the birthday of the trees, and it's this Sunday to Monday. It's Monday, which means it starts Sunday night. And I'm going to tell you a cool thing about Tu B'Shvat and the birthday for the trees. In New York, when I was growing up, when we would celebrate Tu B'Shvat, we would collect money so that we could buy trees in Israel, because we had to live on Israel time, because there's nobody in their right mind would expect to be able to plant trees in New York in the winter, because it's freezing. The ground is totally frozen. You could not dig into the ground for Tu B'Shvat. So we live on Israel time, and it was a very cool thing. When I came to Shreveport, and when I first became rabbi, the president, Stephen Muslow, may his memory be a blessing, he was a forester. And what did I know about foresters? I thought they were people who chopped down trees so that we could use them for very practical things, but they still chop down trees. One day, about a week or so before Tu B'Shvat, he was walking out of the building on a Friday night after services, and I was waving to him goodbye at the door. I was going to lock up behind him, and he turns around, he says, and he's got this gleam in his eye. He's so excited, and he says, you know, we've already planted 1.5 million trees, and we still have 1.5 million more to plant. Like I said, like, now you're planting trees now? And he said, yeah, we just, these past few weeks, we just been planting 1.5 million trees, and we're still planting, and we got another week or so to plant. And it blew my mind for so many reasons. One is that foresters plant trees. They don't just chop trees down, and which made me very happy. But the other was that we're in Shreveport, we're living on Jerusalem time. We're living in the same, same kind of weather situation as similar, not identical, but similar, temperature wise, and certainly being able to plant trees. So we typically plant trees every year at B'nai Zion at Tu B'Shvat, which is a really cool thing. It's not the only thing you do for Tu B'Shvat as a holiday celebration. We also, there's a mystical tradition that we have a Seder for Tu B'Shvat. And Seder is usually from Passover, but there's a mystical Seder for Tu B'Shvat. There are Seders for other purposes that the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, came up with. And some of the cool things that we do for a Tu B'Shvat Seder are, just like we have 4 cups of wine for Passover, which represent the 4 different ways that God talked about taking the Jews out of Egypt, we have 4 different cups of wine, or grape juice, for the Tu B'Shvat Seder, but they're 4 different colors. So we go from winter to spring by having like all white, and then a little bit of red mixed in with the white, and then a little bit of white mixed in with the red, and then all red. So you're watching this evolution of time with your glasses of wine. We also have 4 kinds of foods that we predominantly eat, and they are all foods from trees. We eat a kind of food that has, you can eat the outside. These are things that come from trees. You can eat the outside, but not the inside. Yep, like an apple. Or you can eat the inside, but not the outside, like an orange. Or you could eat you can eat the whole thing, like a date, let's say. Or you can't eat any of it. So you get to say 3 blessings for the fruit of the trees, but you don't get to say that last one. But it's a very cool thing to think about, the many ways. So having a birthday for trees is there so that we can think of many ways that we appreciate trees. But and it's fun. I love watching the kids come up with lots of reasons why we appreciate trees. But it's also helpful because you need to know how old a tree is, because the Torah has commandments that have to do with not eating fruit from a tree before a tree is a certain year age, 3, etc. I've unmuted you. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, you said there's prayers twice a day. During the darker months, are the prayers the exact same as during the more lighter months?
That's a really good question. So there are some changes to prayers that you say throughout the year. In Israel, the change has to do not so much with, so you are going to still say the morning prayer when it's the beginning of the morning, the beginning of the morning. And you're going to say the evening prayer when it's the evening time. But there are certain prayers that you're going to say. In Israel, you've got a rainy season and you've got a dry season. And the rainy season ends as soon as, like the second that Sukkot ends in the fall. And hopefully you had time to take down your sukkah, and it ends, the rainy season ends as soon as Passover is about to begin. Hopefully you have enough time to get into that so that you can walk to Jerusalem, their pilgrimage festivals. And so there are prayers that you say during the service for the rain versus the dew. But there aren't specific prayers about being daytime, nighttime. There are specific prayers about moons, where you are in the moon cycle. So for example, if you're saying a prayer, and we do this at our service, if the Friday night is before there's going to be a new moon that week, we'll say a blessing for the new moon that's about to happen, or that day, or whatever. And there are a lot of challenges about when is the earliest you can say your prayers, and when is, and it has to do with, like, if you can see somebody and you can recognize them, then it may be time for you to be able, even if it's dark out, if you can see somebody at all and you can recognize them at all, it may be time to be able to say your prayers. But if it's your neighbor, that's one thing. And if it's your brother, that's another thing. And like, that's one of the ways that the rabbis get cranky about, picky about their timing things. But we'll talk about that when we talk about prayers more. Yes, you're unmuted.
So I just had a quick question again. I'm sorry for all the questions.
No,
if
please.
I'm time. But so you were talking about the commandments about the fruit and like knowing the age of the tree and stuff. How do you like when you eat like fruit from a grocery store, like how do you know how old the tree is? Or...
And you don't, except for the fact that the trees, the size of the fruit and things that they have, it's so you shouldn't be eating fruit from trees that are less than 3 years old, and they're not going to be harvesting trees that are less than 3 years old. I mean, the fruit's just not going to be as reliable. So it actually kind of works itself out. And you had asked a question, and since I brought this up, you had asked a question in an email today that I hadn't answered you yet. But there are blessings about food that you say, and I just mentioned blessings about fruit from trees. And I already said that you're supposed to look for 100 times to say 100 blessings a day. And this isn't any of the things that I thought I was going to be talking about, but I wanted to bring it up. You should bless your food according to Jewish tradition. And you say a blessing before you eat the food, but you're also commanded to say a blessing after you eat your food. And the blessing you say before you eat your food is short and sweet. It's usually a little one-liner. If you're at a meal that has bread, then that's the blessing you say. Some of you may already have heard of the motzi, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You're thanking God for bringing bread from the earth. If you have bread at your meal, that'll cover everything. If you don't have bread at your meal, or you're having just a snack, like you're going to grab an apple or something, then there are special prayers that you say for different kinds of food. If it comes from a tree, then you say, you praise God for the fruit of the tree. If you are eating something from the ground, you'll praise God for the fruit of the ground. If you're eating something from If you're eating cakes or pastries, it's a different blessing. If you're eating fruit of the vine, that's a different blessing. So one of the things we're going to talk about and that I'll post and I'll give you access to are the blessings for the food. The blessings that you say after the meal is a lovely blessing that's nice and leisurely. So before you eat, you're hungry and you go, yay, God, thanks for the grub. How's it go? Rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub, yay, God. You do a really short and sweet one like that. But no, you don't. But when you're finished, you have this long blessing that thanks God for all kinds of things, making peace in the world. And we hope that God brings a Messiah soon. And we hope that God blesses the people who own the house that we're in and the people who made the food. And thank you for, and like this long thing, because you're trying to sit back and digest. And those prayers are in the prayer book, by the way, and they're online and I can show you how to find them. If you go to summer camp, sleepaway camp, the kids learn how to say the blessings for before meals, before any kind of food, whether it's snack or fruit or whatever, tree food, vegetable food, whatever. And they also learn Birkat Hamazon, which is a blessing after the food. And it's this long thing and they can sing it and they can do it. And it's so cool to see. Lexi, I'm unmuting you. Go.
So for the blessing before the meal, on the website Shabbat.org, and they list 6 different blessings. And I've been going through, and depending upon what the meal is made of, I'm saying 2 and 3, I think one time 4 blessings. So you only have to say one blessing for the
If it's a
entire
meal, you say one blessing. You say that if it's a meal with bread, you only say that one blessing, and that covers you for everything. If it's a meal that is not a meal with bread, then it will depend. There are technical ways of figuring out which blessing to say, whether you only have to say one or if you have to say many. If you're just going to sit down and you're grabbing an apple, you're going to say a blessing just for that apple. If there's more than one kind of food on the table, it's not an easy answer. I can't answer you in 10 seconds. It's a more complicated answer, but I can send you to websites that give you some insights. But
So basically, if I'm eating a cheddar broccoli rice dish, I would say 3 blessings.
no,
One for,
not necessarily. And so we're going to have to, it's not a question I want to answer right now because there's
Okay.
there's a lot of tap dancing around those. So I didn't mean no. I mean, maybe, maybe that might be the right answer, but it will depend. So that's a more complicated answer than what I want to do right now, especially
Okay.
since that's not supposed to be our topic for today. We will have a day when we're going to be talking blessings. Today we were supposed to be talking about the calendar. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the calendar just generally. We're not supposed to be talking even about all of the holidays, but you'll notice that some of these holidays are biblical holidays. Some of them are Torah holidays. And everybody likes to joke about, oh, Hanukkah was really early this year because it came right after Thanksgiving. Hanukkah is never early. Hanukkah is always on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. It's just that the secular calendar just moves around so much that it made it complicated. No, it's just that you'll see, here's you could like predict, you could have a crystal ball and predict that if Hanukkah is coming close to Thanksgiving this year, I can guarantee that Hanukkah is going to come closer to Christmas next year, because you're going to need to compensate. We're ready. We're due for a compensation this year. And that's true. So when this year comes around, we're in Shabbat now, and the month that comes after Shabbat is Adar. What do I love about Adar? My birthday's in Adar. What? My birthday is the 4th of Adar. And there's going to be 2 Adars this year because we're in a leap year. That means I'm going to get 3 birthdays again this year. Yay! I have 1 birthday in Adar 1. I have 1 birthday in Adar 2. And I have 1 birthday in March. Yay! Some people wouldn't want to get that old, have 3 birthdays every year. But I don't think of it as getting old. I think of it as leveling up. So I'm happy to do that. And anyway, I'm the only one who celebrates all 3 of my birthdays. So doesn't bother anybody else. Lexi, you got another question?
Forgive my ignorance on this. Pesach is Passover?
Yes. So,
Thank you.
And we'll be talking through some of those holidays, and I'll help you pronounce them all and things also. If you want, we can run through, since today is supposed to be kind of about the calendar itself. And I had wait, I do have a chart on here. Hold on. If we go down, you can see these bigger. Nisan is the first month of the year. And you can see the word in Hebrew and in a transliteration. It is the first month of the year, which is the number one part. It's not the equivalent of March, April, as we explained yesterday. If you look up Nisan, the translation doesn't mean March, April. It's just that when Nisan will fall, it will straddle usually March and April, somewhere in there. It's going to start on a different day every year, but it's going to be in there. And this is how long it is. The next one is ER. So we have jokes to remember all these things. These are Babylonian names, by the way. These aren't Hebrew names even, but they've turned into Hebrew names. We call it Nisan, the month that was formerly known as Datsun. ER is where you go when you have an emergency situation, a health situation. So ER is 29 days. The month of Sivan is the beginning of a summer. Tammuz, you know you're in the summer when you're in Tammuz. I like that name because Tammuz reminds me of tapuz, and a tapuz is an orange, and you eat the oranges in the end of the spring and the summer. Av has the saddest holiday, Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, when these horrible things have happened to the Jewish people. And it usually happens so it's going to happen in July or August. It happens often when kids are at summer camp. So I'll tell you my silly joke about that, about why our bunk beds at summer camp, why do they remind us of, in what ways do they remind us of the 9th of Av? Because it's Tushi B'Av. Those bunk beds are Tushi B'Av, which is Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av. I'll explain it when you're older. Then we get to the month of Elul, which is the month that precedes the High Holy Days. It's a whole month of introspection. We have the month of Tishri, which is when the High Holy Days come. Rosh Hashanah is the first day, and Yom Kippur is the 10th day, and then Shavuot starts. Sukkot starts on the full moon, and it lasts for a week, so it's going to end in Cheshvan. Cheshvan is the month before. It's sometimes called Mar Cheshvan, Bitter Cheshvan, because there are no other holidays. But let me tell you, after a month of holy days, sorry, I misspoke. Sukkot does not end in Cheshvan. Sukkot ends before Cheshvan starts. Cheshvan is a month that has no holidays except Shabbat in it. Kislev is the month that has Hanukkah. Tevet comes after that. Shvat is the month we're in now, which has the birthday of the trees. Then we have the last month of the year, which is Adar, and it's called just Adar if it's not a leap year. In a leap year, it's called Adar 1 and Adar 2, or sometimes it's called Adar Bet, which means 2. And those are the months of the year. I'm going to stop the share. You can ask questions and we can talk about a calendar. And then we're going to talk about Shabbat. And Shabbat is outside of that calendar because it happens every 7 days. And it really doesn't matter what month you're in. It's going to happen every 7 days, no matter what. And it's not connected to the cycle of the moon. It's going to happen even though a moon cycle will take a 7-day cycle, Shabbat is going to happen on the 7th day, wherever you are in the cycle of the holidays or the cycles of the moon. And next time we're supposed to talk about Shabbat, but I can tell you that Shabbat is my favorite holiday. And we'll talk more about Shabbat, and it'll go into things like Messiah even then. All right, we got more questions. Ready? Zoe, you're next.
Okay, so when we were talking about, how like your birthday can be a different day depending on like the Hebrew calendar. And so I was just thinking like, how do I like ask this? Since like the moon cycles and since like all things like that, the moon phases,
Yeah.
and all of that is really important, and stars are important, like being able to see where the stars are, how many there are, and all of that is important. Is astrology important?
That's a really good question. And some people want to tell you that astrology is not is forbidden in Jewish tradition because the Torah will talk about something like soothsayers and look for people who try to predict the future. So if you're talking about astrology like the kind you read in, like in a newspaper where it feels like it's a generalization and it feels like it's trying to predict what is going to happen in your life, then I would say, don't try to predict what's going to happen in your life. God has a clue. And if you think you're going to find a way that sneaks into God's world to figure out what your future is, that's kind of ridiculous. It also takes away the part of free will that you have, we believe in Judaism. But astrology, the fact that the stars in the sky are the way they are when you're born is something that Judaism recognizes. In fact, for example, the month that has the High Holy Days in it, Tishrei, the symbol for High Holy Days is these scales, this balance scale where you put all your good deeds on one side, all your bad deeds on the other side. And what's the astrological sign at that time?
Yeah, it's
Libra.
Libra.
It's Libra. So, and if you look at some of the ancient synagogues in Israel, there are mosaic depictions of the astrological symbols. So trying to figure out where they do work together and make it kosher and where it stops being, but I would not say, and you can argue with me, it wouldn't bother me if you wanted to argue, but I would not say that Judaism doesn't believe in astrology. I would
So
say
like if you could like tell people like you're a Cancer based on like where the
that,
stars were, for example, because like I'm a Cancer and
Mhm.
according to the moon I'm a Taurus and rising sign is Taurus as well. So
It depends
like
on
that's
what it depends on what importance that's going to have for you in your life, and if it's taking, and if you think about it, is it taking you away from the fact that you have choice in your life and that God has control in your life? If it's taking away from that, then I would say it's not a very wise thing to be putting your faith in.
it only, I guess it depends on what you do with the information. Like, for example, if you're like, oh, I'm a Cancer, and so I know that this is going to happen for me, and I know this is going to happen for me, then it's not okay. But if you say, like, if you put that generalization on some people who are like, all Cancers are sensitive, then,
Mhm.
like, people will joke about that because it can be true. So I feel like, maybe I've
I'll
never really been
yep.
serious on it, but
I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I was in Israel, there was a guy from Australia who had the same birthday as me. So what happens when you're Australia? You're in the opposite, what you're seeing in the sky, the seasons are exactly opposite, which makes even the Jewish calendar a little bit problematic. I have a good friend now from South Africa, and they always celebrate Hanukkah in the summer. They never celebrate Passover in the spring. It's always the fall. And how do you reconcile that with Jewish tradition? You've got to kind of live on Jerusalem time to some extent. So you're doing what the Torah is telling you when the Torah is telling you. And it blows my mind. I mean, when we talk about it, and he'll show me his Hanukkah scenes, and Hanukkah is in the summer. I'm like, what? Although now that I'm in Shreveport, I can't tell you what season it is anymore. All right, Lexi, you're next. And then I have to let people go.
Uh, where would I go to find out my Hebrew birth date?
It's
Have
on the
Cal, have Cal would be a good place to go because I know you referred to that before.
so this is a great site for that, but the B'nai Zion has a calendar that tells you too. There's a website called Hebcal, Hebcal, with a
That's
conversion table on there.
that's
And you
what I
can even
prefer.
print out Jewish calendars from there, and it'll tell you your birth date, your Jewish, the Hebrew date when you were born, and you can even print out a bunch of years. So like you want to know when is your birthday going to fall on the secular calendar for the next 10 years, it'll tell you. It's especially helpful too. I mean, that's fun, but it's especially helpful too if you want to find your site. Some people remember the anniversary of people's deaths on the Jewish day of their death, and so you'll but for example, if you look at you have to we'll play with that. We'll play with that a little bit. So if you were we could you want to look up somebody, let's play that for a second. Let me go to Hebcal. And we can look somebody up so I can show you what it looks like to do this. I'll share my screen again. And it looks like this, and it shows you, are you seeing the screen? So you notice how it says a date converter here. You could do a Yortzites and birthdays where it'll generate a bunch of them for a year, but here's the date converter. And it tells you that today, which is January 13th, is today the 13th? Yeah, today's the 13th. After sunset, it's now the 12th of Shabbat, but before sunset, it was the 11th of Shabbat. And if you wanted to find the 12th of Shabbat for a different year, then you keep, so you want to figure out what day it falls. So, I mean, I'll show you, for example. And by the way, this says show Hebrew Nikudot. You want, and if you take it off, I'll show you. Nikudot means vowel.
Go back 81 years from 2022.
Let's do this, watch. So let's say we want to find somebody's birthday, okay? And the day was, you want to pick on somebody?
Yeah.
You want to pick on mom? Her birthday's this week.
Yeah.
Let's pick on mom. So her birthday is 15 of January. And we know how old she was because she's not afraid to tell us. She was born this year. So we're going to say, include the Hebrew dates, and we're going to create a calendar. Go for 20 years. And this is going to show her for the next 20 years what day it falls on. So this year it falls on Monday, what?
They didn't.
That feels
That's
like
the
22.
16th of Tevet. That's not.
So this is the 16th of Tevet, but it should show 20, what?
Yeah, but we're in Shvat.
Oh, I must have gone, no, I gave it a, this is really weird, because what I did was I gave it a birthday on a,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to give me, what days oh, I see what we're talking. Yeah, you're right. I gave it a secular date, and now it's giving me the wrong thing. All right, we have to do the other way. So I would go back to this. This is how I would do it. I would go to what I said, the date converter. Where's my date converter? Date converter. Go to this and say, I'm going to convert a Gregorian to a Hebrew. So go to the 15th of January, 1941, and say convert to Hebrew. And so now I know that her birthday is on the 17th of Tevet, 5701. So now all I have to do is pick 17th of Tevet and go to the birthday one. And I want to say, I'm going to go back 17th Tevet, come back to this one.
But is the next month Tevet? Shouldn't it be in Shvat?
Nope, it's not necessarily the year she was born. That's the problem.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Yep. So the problem is, what year was she
Okay.
born? Where are we? Because this year, remember, was an extremely early.
Early,
So she is,
as opposed to next year.
yeah, we said the 17th of Tevet, right?
Yeah.
I was born on the 8th of Tammuz, and it hardly ever falls in the Gregorian month I was born.
Yeah. So, and what's going to happen is every 19 years, it's going to show up on the same date as your actual birthday. So this is when the 16th of Tevet was going to show up for all those years. Anyway, that gives you an idea. Sorry, I hiccuped for a second. I didn't
So
mean
in
to.
other words, on the Jewish calendar, you could have 1 year, you're in 1 month, but the next year, you're in the next month or the previous month.
No, not always. I mean, my
Well,
birthday, my birthday may be in March most of the time. My Adar 4 may be in March most of the time, but it also may fall in February some of the time. It's because my birthday was the beginning of March, so the beginning of Adar, so there's going to be some leeway, and it's going to shift around.
And she also gets to cheat because of the Dar too.
I do, and I wasn't
So it's
born
all
in
over
Adar
the
2.
place.
So the truth is, yeah, so Adar 2, if your birthday is not really, if you weren't born in Adar 2, you don't necessarily get to celebrate it twice. But I want to, so I do. It's kind of like if your birthday is the 29th of February,
Mhm.
You'll
You
have
can
to
pick whenever
explain
you
that
want.
one to me one day.
Yeah, you could pick when you want.
Right.
Anyway, that's going to be it for Jewish calendar. If you've got questions, whatever, email me. I'm going to stop the recording.